Hello, fellows and fellowettes of ill repute. And I shall give you greetings too, though I shan't uh insult you in such an egregious fashion. To me, you are heroes and protagonists of the most holy and beautiful nature.
Suck up.
Yes, totally, and I admit it unreservedly.
We are Adventuresome Reviews. Today, reviewing Voice of War by
Zach Argyle.
Dun Dun Dun.
Yes. Which is a great name, and the cover is actually really cool too.
Yeah, the cover does look pretty good.
All the smoky and spooky figure and the glowing blue eyes. It's very appealing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the book is ever so slightly less appealing.
Yeah, it was one of those books that I didn't really care for. Some of it was, for me, the characters. So you had two-ish main characters.
You have three, but the third one doesn't show up until halfway through the book.
Yeah. And so one of the characters, whose name
is Laurel or Chris?
Chris. He's all right. He has his personality, I guess. His main flaw is that he doesn't have a very powerful or exciting personality, and while he has to deal with what is it called?
The Apogi, which I also actually really
I like the name the Apogi quite a bit.
Yes, and it's just really good.
Yeah, and so that dynamic almost worked for me, but at the same time, it really...
The Apogi is a voice that's constantly inside Chris's head, saying, let me out, I can help you. Only problem is that it's the same line over and over and over again, and the interaction, it gets incredibly stale very fast. It's, let me out, I can help, you can't do this. No, let me out, almost in the word for word, let me out, you can't do this, I can help. No.
And part of it is that the interaction itself is very predictable. For the moment you see it, you know the Poke's going to come out.
Yes.
Eventually, there's going to be something, and so that takes.
But you can't really blame it because that's part of that's a beneficial trope. It's you're building towards something. It's the failure is happens when the author fails to get you interest in this promised moment, because that's what it is. It's the author promised you that the Apogi is going to break out, and the promise is.
That's going to be an awesome moment, and it's going to be tragic and all kinds of violence.
However, because of the lackluster interactions between the Apogi and Chris, little interest is built toward this upcoming moment, even though the author teases you with several moments throughout the book where it's like, oh, now it's going to come out, right? This would be a good time for the Apogi to come out. But he doesn't, which is not bad by any stretch.
And so I think part of that is that the Apogi, part of how you said that, it's the same interaction, but the Apogi itself is rather vague. Like, it's a thing of violence and a spirit of war to some effect.
It's basically a berserker. Chris is an old war hero, though he's not old, and he earned great renown as the Apogi, though we cannot remember what he did to earn that. Only that there's bodies everywhere after he woke up. So
it's kind of allies and enemies alike.
So it's a bit of a berserker syndrome.
Yeah, but that's not interesting in of itself. But that's all the author gave the Apogi was.
It's all hearsay, kind of twice removed.
Yeah, and so the Apogi itself, while a presence, never really becomes something that you want to see. And so it ends up being a lackluster narrative. And outside of the Apogi, Chris doesn't have a whole lot going for him, per se. Like, he's not particularly charismatic or tormented or anything like that. He has his wife and he's enamored of her, but again, there's nothing for the readers to interact with his character.
The book does make the book makes fairly strong use of both his wife and his child. The very first chapter of the book. No, not leave that. The book has these several scenes that I really enjoyed. one of those scenes is that Chris discover this is convoluted. Chris is tasked. Oh, completely forgot to read the synopsis. Whatever.
You guys don't need the synopsis.
Yes.
We'll tell you what the book's about.
Chris is tasked with hunting down a group called the Blood Thieves, who is draining magic from the blood of magic users and selling it on the black market. He discovers who is behind this, and then it's a figure who's high up in government, right? And so they two know each other, and so Chris immediately just boogies out of there, running straight to his wife, so that he can get them out of the city, because this is not a fight he can engage in anymore. Whereupon his wife decides to start giving birth. And it's a great moment because, he has nowhere to go. He has to fight this lopsided battle. And so he's this Threadweaver, who is the magic user, right? And he runs outside to set up some sort of defensive perimeter in the middle of a city in a completely undefended castle with all his friends away on missions. He is in a corner here, and it is great.
Yeah.
And then 4 more magic users come out, and they surround him. It's like, well, now you're kind of toasted and roasted. And in the background, his wife is giving birth to a child that he is desperately eager to protect. It's a fairly solid moment. It's like, it gave me hope for the book.
Yeah, it was a well-plotted moment. But speaking of that, we have the magic system, and I'm kind of in a mixed boat of the magic system. I really like how the magic system was expressed, with how when they used the thread weaving, their veins lit up with the light visibly in their eye. That was a very cool imagery for me.
Yeah, and then there's also kind of thread sickness, and there's a lot of details about the book because you have thread sickness. So if you use too much magic, if you pull, you get sick. Vomit, yada yada. Cool, a nice balance to it. But then there's also an addiction factor. Like, you can get addicted to the magic.
Yeah.
Which is, once again, really nice. The problem I had with the magic system is that its basic features is push or pull magic.
Very one-dimensional, but there are moments where the author used it really well. There's that one fight where the guy used the push or the pull to empower himself as he leapt up and punched a guy on a horse. And that was a really effective use. Like, small time, very believable use of the magic that I really enjoyed. Ignoring the fact that would have broken the guy's hand, but it was still...
I think Threadlight strengthens the body a little, but regardless.
I don't remember anything mentioned that, but regardless of it, but it's still just, there were times where the author made good use of the magic system, but also, yes, it is very one-dimensional and...
kind of boring. And that being said, the author does another scene that I actually really enjoyed, and so throughout the first quarter of the book, you are introduced to the most basic echelons of the magic system. The people with green threadlight and blue threadlight. Green pulls, blue pushes. So blue people can push up into the air, jump 20 feet, and land safe, right? Or they push on the ground to make sure they land slowly. And green can pull arrows out of the way or pull themselves toward building walls. It's fairly basic, and everybody has this threadlight apart from those few people who have two eyes, polychromatic eyes, right? In which case they have both magic systems. So they are given, it's not touched on at all, but obviously they're obviously more powerful than everybody else. Then you have those who are achromatic, who have brown eyes.
Yeah.
And they don't have any magic, which is the vast majority of the population. However, as you start getting comfortable into this and you start seeing what blue and green threadlight and how this makes them relatively powerful, you come into the scene and completely out of the blue, this character comes up and she has bright yellow eyes. It's like, oh, now I'm interested. Because it's something that was not... And she's a villain, right? And it wasn't led into at all. And then she's, rather than pushing or pulling, she generates threads. Bright yellow threads that would have totally defeated our Chris, like, just easily, if he had not kind of an escape card.
Yeah, he has a cheat code and it's totally unfair.
Yeah.
But
and then you get a second one when they introduce a second class of magic later on. in itself was also one of the scenes that I really enjoyed because it's where we introduce our third character, who is by far the best of the three.
I would agree. I still didn't get particularly attached to him because he didn't come in until halfway through the book, and I spent the first third of him wondering, are you going to be an antagonist or a decent person?
But that was part of the actually what made him interesting is, in his very first chapter, he's met with a moral decision. Is okay, so let's actually backtrack. So his very first chapter, he wakes up in the middle of the desert surrounded by bodies after having died. That's an absolutely fantastic opening introduction to a character.
Yes.
And so then he starts slogging across the desert, no water, naked and just resurrected from death to get to the city.
Yeah.
And he promptly after meeting to the city, he runs off to tell his girlfriend, "Hey, I'm alive. No need to worry." Only to find out that his girlfriend hooked up with his best friend. And all of a sudden, the question is he going to turn evil? Is he going to turn dark? And is there going to be some sort of malignant presence resulting of his resurrection? And this is a fairly engaging scene because you see a balance between light and darkness.
Mm-hmm.
He lands on the side of light and decides to just boogie out of there. Tears streaming from his eyes. "Oh no, how can you do this to me?" and all that jazz. But at the same time, he's also gifted with the fourth brand of magic, and it is perhaps the most powerful of the four, and he has the ability to cut threads, which is a little more important than it might sound, but it's also really cool. He has the ability to fly too.
I think part of the reason that none of the characters really stuck with me is that the author was very ham-fisted with their characterization. Just very, I was angry, I have to protect them. This was the most tragic event of his life. I felt like a god.
Yeah.
Very just ham-fisted,
Telling.
superficial about conveying their emotions. And the one character that wasn't really, but didn't have all of her emotions just bluntly stated, and there was some interaction with her emotions from the reader, was the second main character.
Laurel, it was about time we got around to her because...
And I did not like Laurel.
Picture perfect of know-it-all teen. Adult says, "That's a bad idea." "No, it's not." Flips the bird and... Oh, no, she doesn't even flip the bird. She says, "No, it's not. You know nothing."
And it is just... She has no redeeming qualities throughout the entire book. She gets addicted to her thread magic. She
doesn't listen to anybody who tells her she's getting addicted.
And does next to nothing throughout the book. And it was just, I did not like her. And she's probably a large part of the reason I didn't particularly care for the book, because a significant part of the portion of the book is centered on her.
Almost, yeah. She has one set of enjoyable interactions, and that's with her brother, right? Who she meets up with twice and very briefly. The brother is more interesting because he has a bit of a blood disease and he's just a little bit weak. But that's the only enjoyable interactions for a character who consumes probably a little bit more than a third of the book. Yeah, she was just a pain to read.
Yeah. The plot was another mystery plot.
Yeah.
And we've actually run into a fair number of those recently. But
it's a bit more, it's not exactly a mystery plot because you have three characters and each of them are following a different plot.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris, who is kind of the main character because he has the apogie, it follows the mystery of who are the blood thieves, those people stealing magic from thread weavers.
Yeah, and the plot doesn't really work as a mystery because you have no interest in resolving the mystery. There's no play around with why the blood thieves are doing this or who they really are. There's nothing that needs to be answered. They're criminals who are stealing the blood from thread weavers. They have to
killing the thread weavers in the process.
And so it becomes a simple follow breadcrumbs and there really are very few breadcrumbs.
The mystery aspect of Chris's storytelling is over by the fourth of the way through the book. He found out who the blood thieves are, and is immediately on the run.
Yeah. And so it doesn't do what a mystery should do, and then it becomes a simple action sequence, or a series of action set pieces featuring often characters you don't care about.
And then, so Laurel, all three characters have their own plotline. Laurel is, once again, the worst. She doesn't have a plotline. She has no direction or goal other than kind of getting miffed at her elders.
Yeah.
She and Chris meet up a little later, and it's not because she's heading anywhere. It's because I'm out of this place. You people don't know anything. So she drops down from the secret elvish castle. Not that they're elves, but they're in the treetops. So elvish castle, and goes running off into Huss.
Yeah.
And that is 95% of her story. She has no direction. You don't like her. She has no goals. She's not building toward anything.
Yeah, well, none of the characters are really building.
Chris is building towards something. And the third character, he's not necessarily building toward anything, but he is still progressing because it's like his plot line is, okay, I'm awake, I want to go get a little bit of revenge on the people who killed me. Perfectly understandable. And his two enemies are the two dictatorial monarchs of his city.
Yeah.
So it's an engaging story. He goes it alone and promptly goofs it up because he's not the most bright person. He's very close to being straight up dumb, but not in an enjoyable way. It's just, why are you doing this? This is stupid type way.
Yeah. A similar point is the world building of the world outside of the magic system, which works if is a little bland. I did not particularly care for the world building. You have the secret tribe of people living in the trees who have to protect something in secret, and you're like, okay. And then you have this rebellion out in the deserts, and you're like, okay, what are you rebelling against? Because they don't introduce any tyrannical domain that needs to be resisted, but you have this outlaw city, and that's where the third character comes in, and you don't care at all about the outlaw city, but you spend a huge amount of time there, and then you have the main city, and again, you don't care anything about the main city. And it's just, there's world building, but none of it's interesting to me, and some of it doesn't make sense, really.
Because what's worse is that there's a great deal of world building that is not conveyed through interaction of the main character stumbling into the pit of lava type thing. It's all told to you through what is it? Exposition. And there is a lot of exposition. It's telling exposition, and it's almost 50% of every chapter, which slows down the book and makes it very boring.
This was a book I struggled to finish, even as we were getting into the climax where everything was supposedly coming together, and there was evident stakes on the setting, but you did not care about the stakes. Besides Chris's child, that was the only thing you cared about. That was one small detail I liked, though.
In the climax,
we're getting spoilers here, so you may want to.
I wasn't actually going to exploit too much, but in the climax, 50% of the climax deals with the Apogi and an attack on the Elvish city. However, there is also this little cutout square of where Chris's newborn child comes into danger, and it is another one of those just absolutely fantastic moments.
I really liked
it was actually horrifying. I was like, oh no, oh, this is scary. Not like oh, scary, but it's like, oh, I was actively worried. This is not good. It was fantastic.
Chris's child is, I really enjoyed 95% of the scenes where Chris's child was involved. He provided a strong emotional nucleus, one of the few instances of strong emotional nucleus for Chris that the readers could really get behind. And the child interacted with the story in three distinctly different ways.
while being a baby. The child is pretty much the best part of the book because there is so much plot and narrative and story and just ripples sprawling out from this, weak old babe. It is absolutely great.
Yes.
And the third character comes to the rescue, and he kind of screws over the world in doing so, which is all mysterious, and we won't explain why. But once again, it's the third character being a decent character because he is once again faced with a choice between light and dark, and he once again makes the choice to side on the path of light. Like I said, he's the best character, and he's interesting.
He's one of the, because he is challenged with challenge that he cares about. Chris defending his wife giving birth to a child is putting Chris in a situation where he has to make a hard decision. And so that gives him that's what makes the scene compelling. You have this third character, he's constantly given choices that mean something to him. Laurel is challenged and does not care about the challenges and just goes off and does her own thing. And you don't like her own thing.
You don't like Laurel at all. Like, the book would be markedly improved if you just cut out the third of the book with her in it. Like, one of the main characters is she has a pet direwolf, not the name, but direwolf.
Wolf.
I know, but direwolf, that's what it is. The direwolf is more engaging than she is. It saves people,
almost eats Chris.
Becomes the head of the pack. Laura rides him into battle once, and it's more cool because of him than because of her.
Yeah. So returning back to the magic system really quickly. It's a simple magic system, but if it was an extremely combat-focused book, where you give your main characters tools to use in the fight, then it becomes a combat-focused book like the Combat Codes was, and then you really explore how the thread-weaving fights, that would make for some really neat action sequences.
Okay, so thread weaving works as
people have core threads, and the blue people push on it to launch them forward, or push on other things to push them away, or to push off things, and so very simplistic. And everything is
kind of connected by threads.
Very interactive with the environment.
Right, and green thread weavers, they pull, so they pull things toward them via threads and yada yada. And so rather than delving into the potential combat and intricacies of that, the book introduces an obsidian knife a quarter of the way through that cuts threads, which is uninteractive. Powerful, but uninteractive.
But also the author just didn't understand combat enough to use the magic to its maximum potential. Because
I don't think it's...
I can see in my head an action sequence between two characters who are competent, and they are pushing on things at each other. They are leaping off walls or pulling themselves out of the way, or there's just...
Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think I'm not sure. The problem is not that the author doesn't understand combat. It's that he didn't get knee deep into it. Right? And so the obsidian knife, which can cut threads, is not a bad narrative thing. The problem is that it came in too soon.
And it was given to the protagonist. Given to the enemy or to an antagonist, it would have been much more interesting.
And so it's not a bad thing. It's not narratively evil, awkward, what have you. The only problem with it is that it prevents thread weavers from interacting what we want. So it's not bad, it's just it handicaps what we actually wanted to see.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just really trying to say that it's not a bad mechanic, right? It's just a little awkward.
Yeah.
So, another scene that the book did well is actually the first chapter.
That's the first chapter, while a little bit horrifying, was also the part of the world building that made no sense for me. Because what happens is you have families and you have a 2-child limit. You can have a third child, if it's a thread weaver, you can keep it. If it's not a Threadweaver, it goes to the church and it gets blinded with acid. Which is horrific because the author describes it fairly effectively, but that makes no sense.
Yeah, that's not.
Because it's not like an overpopulated world. It's just a random.
It's not even like a super religious. What's it called when religion rules the country? Regardless, the church does not rule this country, so it's not even give us acolytes type thing. It's just a completely random 2-child limit.
Yeah.
Because if the church was the quote unquote the villain and they're taking all children, all third, fourth, and fifth children, that makes a lot of sense. That is instantly becomes an engaging villain narrative.
Yes.
However, that's not the case. It's just a 2-child limit that's a bit weird.
And it pays no dividends as the book comes along. It's just a random bit of world building that doesn't quite fit.
Mm-hmm. The first chapter also introduces you to a character who never shows up again, is all sorts of mysterious, and it just never gets resolved.
I imagine that gets resolved later on in the series.
Yeah, I assume so.
I think that's all I have to really say about the book, and
I have one little story left to tell.
We've all basically told them everything that happens in the book now. We have there's maybe 1 or 2 details that we haven't spoiled.
Well, I'm going to spoil another that's not worth spoiling. Personally for me, I really enjoy reading interactions between characters. It's the thing I enjoy most about a book, right? I will endure any amount of boring exposition, terrible, yada yada, so long as 2 characters interact in an enjoyable fashion. This book does not have that. This book has almost no character interaction whatsoever. And by character interaction, I mean 2 characters talking at each other. 95% of the character interactions is plot focused. We're in, let's move the plot along. This is the mission, yada yada, which is boring and just bleh. And that there's also very little of it because every chance the author gets, he uses exposition to convey something. You're kind of distracting me.
That's the intent.
Yes. And so, but even the interactions themselves are horribly boring, which is just unutterably depressing for me. You have this one interaction where Chris meets with this other noble lady, because Chris is the High General of the realm, and he meets this lady for the first time, and he says, "Hello, I'm Chris." Only it's not even that exciting. She says, "Chris, like Christopher?" He says, "No, just Chris." That's boring when it actually could have been much better, because he actually, his name is actually Chrysanthemum, because he and his mother are fugitives, not quite fugitives, but fugitives from the elven village.
You said you weren't going to spoil anything.
Okay, that was obvious from page 2, what have you. And everybody from the Fey village, from the Elvish village, has flowers for names. So he is called Chrysanthemum.
Which is a name I really like.
Yes, but it's still flowers to him. So that interaction between him and the lady, one, it serves no purpose whatsoever, right? But it becomes significantly interesting if she goes, "So, is that short for Christopher?" He goes, "No," shuffles his feet, looks a little bit, not miffed, or maybe miffed, but embarrassed. He says, "It's chrysanthemum, like the flower." Yes.
So he doesn't know he doesn't know.
Yes, he doesn't, and that's the problem. The author was trying to do something there, and it just failed, literally. And that's almost all the interactions, just boring or plot furthering interactions.
So, I'd probably give this book 2.5 stars.
Yes. And parts of the book are good. It's just 95% it's not.
Yeah.
And it might be better than we're thinking, because it obviously made it into...
If I was being generous, I would have given it 3 stars, because it's not terrible, really. It's, apart from Laurel.
Who's terrible.
But the book itself is not terrible, it's just boring for me.
Yes, and a lot. It's like even the world exposition. A lot of the world exposition is one boring world. It's not interactive at all. It's like he describes flowers in the middle of a forest, and the flowers are just flowers. They're not healing herbs. They're not used in the story at all. They're not threatening.
Well, they're kind of used in the story with how the flowers are the road, the path.
Okay, yeah, those flowers are kind of interesting, but there's other flowers he describes that. The world is not interactive either. It's not like they're walking over poison poppies or anything, right? So 2.5 stars. The author clearly had a vision, and kudos to him. It's just it's slow to read.
Yeah. Oh well, on that tragic note.
We can only apologize profusely for this absolute evisceration. It was minorly fun because it's nice to be evil once in a while, but still,
I must leave you to cry out our despair.
Yes. We'll go drown our despair in ice cream and such. Is only just incorrect.
Toodles.
Fairly well, our future friends.